All right, y'all, welcome to the first video introducing the new art movement that I want to start called Passable. Before we get to it, what you're seeing here is a website basically giving us a list of all the art periods and all the art movements throughout human history. And I've noticed that in later years, like in the 1800s or so, maybe even like 1600s, a lot of things were in reaction or response to a particular art movement or something bad happening in society. And Passable has been born now in response, in reaction to what is happening in our society today, which is a lot of burnout, a lot of creative burnout, a lot of corporate exploitation, and creator's guilt, in which you have so much potential, but your environment does not allow you to fully tap into that potential because the environment is hostile. It might be even online. The people are hostile. We know this. And so it stunts your growth. It stunts your development. And you feel a bit guilty about the fact that you can't use your full power because you have to carry or balance so much happening in your life, working 16 hours jobs, working in a toxic environment in general, 5 days, 6 days a week, and you come back just totally fried. You feel guilty that you couldn't do your work. You feel guilty you couldn't put in the effort in producing your product to its utmost potential. And I decided that, you know what, in response to this, in reaction to this, the movement Passable has to be born. Now, Passable, if we go now to the diagram I created, this is Passable, right? So how to achieve Passable? Passable basically is creating, this falls under the context of sequential art, especially manga creation in general. It falls under that. I'm not talking about basic illustrations here or pinups or whatnot. We're talking about in the context of sequential art in the manga department. So Passable is a response and a reaction to the hostile environment that is our world, in which now we know, and you will consciously make the decision now that you will do the bare minimum for your product. And you will do it consciously in mind with the idea of Passable. And Passable is doing the bare minimum so that you can finish your product. It's not going Omega level Super Saiyan because you don't have the time to do so, right? You're too tired. If you have the energy to go Omega level Super Saiyan, you're going to have short bursts of energy. You're not going to be able to have a Super Saiyan 3 output all the time consistently. And in the long term, that's going to seriously fry your brain. And then it's going to create more problems down the future. So Passable is created with the intention that the artist must recognize and must consciously now create with the purpose of creating art that is passable, meaning it's consumable, it is good enough, but it's still pleasing, right? And just because it's good enough or the bare minimum, it does not mean it has to be lackluster, okay? For every little thing you removed from your plate, you must compensate with what remains. Let me say that again. With everything you remove from your plate of food, what remains on that plate must compensate for what has been removed. So let's say you're cooking up a storm, right? You don't have the time to cook a full star gourmet anymore. You don't have the time for that. You're too tired. However, that does not mean that what remains on the plate should not be gourmet level taste. So what I did here is that all Passable created mana or manga or comics, it must apply these 4 principles. This is the only way. It must have contrast, very good contrast. I put some of my own stuff here. Then I put Gachi Akuda. It must have good contrast. It must have good composition. It must have very vivid, I should have written here, vivid facial expressions, and it must have panel flow. Just having this will be enough for the consumer to be satisfied. They will recognize that, the plate is not as full of food as I would have liked, but I'm still satisfied because the presentation of the plate is great, and all the food that was on the plate, whether it's 3 pieces and a little bit of salad, it was satisfying. Those little things, those 4 things that are on the plate, the contrast, the composition, the facial expression, the panel flow, these things are so satisfying. I don't want my money back. I'm glad I bought it. This is what we're doing here. This is consciously doing this. So if I show you the other diagram, the ManaA dishes. Now it's the same example, right? So imagine now we're all cooks. We are cooks. If you're creating your own story, you're a cook. Now, what people are used to getting is a gourmet feast such as this, right? Having all sorts of roast duck, onion chili sauce, celery, I think it's celery, tortatas, some other secret sauce, and something else over there. This takes a long time to prepare, especially that sauce. It takes a while. It ain't easy to make tortillas, right? It ain't easy. I've tried to make it, was a disaster. But ultimately, we can no longer cook up a gourmet plate like this. We can't do it. We cannot do it. So I'm showing you guys that the types of dishes that you now have to consciously be making are these 3 right here. And we're going to be going through an example of each of these 3, right? So I will say, with the new idea that is Passable for me, I would say my new dish now, consciously, that I'm going to make sure that I achieve this Passable standard, is this one. Now this one, you can clearly see you got a carrot, peas, sweet mayo sauce, gravy, and some lettuce, and 1 piece of, whether it's chicken or duck, whatever, 1 piece of meat. This is my goal from now on. And let's quickly look at an example from the new manga, the new chapter I did, right? Only just the first 2 pages, well, the first page and the last page. Now, when I made this, I drew this page last compared to in between, right? So I only thought up of this movement Passable 2 days ago. And I finished drawing this page yesterday, right? And a part of me had forgotten that, bro, you have to apply Passable. And nonetheless, I'd say I've definitely achieved Passable here. At first, it was a bit more complicated and a bit more detailed than what it is. So I had to remove a few things so I can create a consistent plate. I don't want people eating my food one day saying, wait, we got this dish, then the next day we got this dish, and then the next day we got that dish. No, you have to be consistent with the type of dish you're always going to be served. I choose number 2, right? I choose number 2 over there. And so we go back to this page, this page 1 and 2, the first 2 pages basically. And I would say I've achieved it. I've achieved the simplicity of it. It could have been simpler, but if it was any simpler, it would have to be number 3. In fact, no, sorry, it'd have to be number 1. Because number 1 only has fewer ingredients. 1 steak, tiny steak, gravy. Let's say this is sugar cane, roasted mushrooms, and some maca powder, it seems, and some leaves. That's it. It has less elements compared to this one, right? So I prefer dish number 2 because it works well with my style. It's also something you have to remember. Does it work well with your style? You see, the style in which you draw your characters, does it work well? If it doesn't, you're gonna have to pick a dish out of these 4 that actually fits your style. Now I'm saying none of us can make number 4 actually, or shouldn't try to make number 4. I mean, if you got the time, go ahead, but is it sustainable to have a Super Saiyan 3 output and constantly cooking that amount of food? Obviously, I say not. It's not, right? So you have to pick from one of the 3. If we go to the lost page, same thing, right? Same thing. It could have been simpler if I did not use the shading and so on, but you know, I like Mononogatari, studied the heck out of it to apply this sort of shading techniques, and I like it. So it still fits well under dish number 2, right? It fits well. If we go to how to achieve the principle of Passable in general, and we examine the contrast and composition. Let's start with those 2. Contrast immediately achieved. There is a balance. There is a good balance overall looking at both these pages, right? Composition also well achieved, right? At first, I didn't know how I wanted to draw Irene's sister facing straight at the camera. Then I said, no, it won't have much impact. So I said, let's put her in the composition she's in now, because she's on a dragon. So she's up in the air and getting excited that she's finally going to come, start a fight and whatnot. So composition wise, achieved. Irene clearly sensing her power level. It's very simple. It's a very simple, but it has this sense of urgency, or how can I say? I don't want to say it's ultra dynamic because it's not, but you feel the movement. So the lack of having a dynamic shot was compensated with movement, and the movement was achieved with the hair, the flow of the hair, the earrings being diagonal like this, right? The little pieces of dirt over there flying. It creates a sense of movement, and it tricks your brain to think that this is dynamic, but not really. But nonetheless, it's passable. You see what I'm talking about? It's passable. Now, this is what we do at Koffee. We create things. People cannot say Koffee's a doomer, he's a gloomer, he just complains about hunchbacks, he doesn't do anything. Well, I clearly do. I just created another movement. I created ManaA, and now I created Passable. And I'm leading by example. You see, this is what we do. If people want to say all he does is just say, the world is ending, yada, yada, yada. Well, I'm not sitting down and playing games 10 hours a day, am I? Or just squeezing one off to OnlyFans hoes. I'm actually building something. Who would build anything in a house that's on fire? Right? I'm still building. That's what y'all gotta do. There is no time to just sit there because you're not gonna feel any better. We need to move forward. And the whole point of Passable is to minimize the burnout, the dissatisfaction that you might feel from having a gourmet level output, but the returns are not nowhere near the same as the investment and time you put in, right? If we go back to the principles, we see facial expression and panel flow. Facial expression, let's go back to page 1. They are not so vivid, but it's passable. Compensation for a lack of vivid expression. is all the other elements, composition, right? But above all else, toning. Knowing how to tone your characters creates this atmospheric mood in your scenes, in which we see Julian over here. You can see he's clearly rather, well, not upset per se, but just looking like a bastard, you know. But the toning gives him mood. If I did not tone him in this panel over here, you would wonder what's exactly going on. Like he's standing on this giant thingy here on the castle, looking down at the city, or at the empire. So nonetheless, it gives tone, right? And then expression doesn't always have to be based on the face alone. The face is key, but poses is also key. We know how Julian sees himself, thinks of himself, and what he wants because of the composition as well. We see him raise his hand up and the camera angle is beneath him because, well, he's feeling himself. Ultimately, you get the expression, the idea that I was trying to convey overall with how I laid out everything. We see him here smiling to himself as if he's already won the battle, right? But that's not the case. Panel flow, if we examine panel flow now. Now, panel flow is something that a lot of us can improve on. For me, my panel flow clearly has improved greatly since chapter. It improves all the time. But I'd say even when I noticed that, damn, your panel flow has improved, I'd say after chapter 11. So from chapter 12 to now, my panel game has been improving. Now, improving significantly. Now with the conscious understanding and commitment to Passable, my panels are going to be way more simpler, right? It's not going to be Omega Shenron level swag and cool like Gachi Akuda. Not that I don't want it to, but remember, you're participating in Passable here. For compensation for a lack of awesome panels, you better have the other three down on lock. That's how it is. If your panel game ain't sweet like that, you better have the other three unlocked. Now, let's look at one of my dudes from my other Discord, the Patreon Discord, and look at his work real quick. See, right here, if we examine everything based on what I said about the contrast, the composition, facial expression, and so on, he achieves Passable already. Like he's already a Passable artist, right? There's contrast here, and the composition. I would have changed a few things because having all the characters centered like this sometimes breaks the flow, or it makes everything too stationary. But let's say we put composition out for this one. He's got facial expression, right? He's got contrast. Does he have panel flow? Well, it does flow well, but it's too simple. But it's passable. Nonetheless, he's got 2 out of 4. Let's say that. He's got 2 out of 4. It's passable. I would have changed a bit of the composition to add a bit more oomph. You know, the panel flow, one needs to be creative not to always box in your characters. Because sometimes it's like, oh, these characters feel boxed in. But nonetheless, he got 2 out of 4, so he achieves Passable. If we look at his other page over here, now I don't know if these are following each other. These are just, oh, okay, this is page 4, this is page 3. So these are following each other, right? But I like this page more Um, this one definitely, in terms of contrast, it's there. It's not significant, but it's there. The black does wonders. The strong black hair, it does wonders. The character expression, seeing this part here, he achieves it. The panel flow again, actually it works well in this one with what's going on overall. It works. It's simplified. It works. So he's got panel flow. In terms of composition, yeah, it also works. It also works. Now there are levels to how far you can take your composition, but nonetheless, it works. So ultimately, Stinger here achieves Passable very well. So now I've mentioned that I picked dish number 2. My work is that of dish number 2. If we look at Stinger, actually, what would you guys say he falls under? Which dish? Dish 1 or dish 3? Definitely, I would not put him in dish 2. I want to put him in dish 1, actually, because there is not many other things to look at aside from the characters and so on. So it's way more simple. So he definitely, I'd say, falls under dish 1, right? Let's quickly finish off my pages. So if we come to the last page and we look at facial expression and panel flow, here, I won't lie, I didn't know what to draw for this page because it wasn't in the storyboards actually, right? So I just made something up quickly, but I needed it to have impact. So in terms of facial expression, I definitely got it. We can see that Irene is nervous, she's hesitant, she's worried, and she's serious. So is Charlotte over here, her sister. She looks bat-ish insane. So vivid character expressions achieved. Panel flow, panel flow, I'd say achieved as well, especially when you look at how this panel comes all the way from the top down, and then this one is also like, it leads your eye very well, right? So achieved. Now let's go to Seji's work from Unsuru Go. Now I would say, if you guys haven't read Engine Quest, you should check it out. It's pretty cool. I haven't done like a full analysis on it, but there was a few things about, now Seji, if you're watching this ain't a roast, but this is for educational purposes. So Seji is very good at Passable. He achieves Passable, right? And when we start talking about the ManaA ingredients as well, let's jump into it, in fact, right now. Seji is able to achieve 2 out of the 4 here, so far, for me, right? For me, he achieves 2 of these ingredients. And what are they? Familiarity, right? Familiarity, because you look at his style, it reminds you of Dragon Ball. It puts you in that nostalgia. You know that, this is familiar. I want to check it out some more, right? It has this aesthetic of hopefulness. Akai, the main character, seems like a very interesting character. He's like Goku, where he has his whole life ahead of him. This grand adventure that's going to bring about hope. That's the vibe I get, you know. However, when it comes to relatability, I cannot relate to Akai as of yet. I can't. In terms of it being inspiring, usually that only happens after a character overcomes something really serious. Really serious, really catastrophic, or the story ends, and that's going to determine whether it was an inspiring story or not, you see. But ultimately, Seiji achieves the 2 out of the 4 ingredients here. For those wondering, do I achieve all 4? Well, I'd say I do. You read My Bloody Hell, it reminds you of Berserk and Bloody Hell. Berserk and Dragon Ball. Is it relatable? If you've been traumatized and got screwed over significantly in your life, you can relate to his problems. I have testimonies, guys saying they can relate to Jacob. They can understand his pain. Hopeful, as of right now in the story, it's about to get hopeful. Jacob has a renewed soul. So I know I'm going to achieve the hopefulness of it. In this dark world that is bloody hell, one piece of light will shine that will bring about hope, right? Inspiring. If Jacob can commit and stay faithful to this hope, it will be inspiring. Do you see? So these are the core principles that will make a mana a mana. It's the principles, it's the building blocks, it's what's going to set us apart. You build your story around these principles, you can't go wrong. You can't go wrong. All these things, though, are going to require one to have extrapolate from reality, to have had life experience of their own in which they overcame a few things. But those are the mana ingredients. Let's go to the mana dishes. Now, I brought up Seji's work because before we go to the principles of Passable, when I first examined it, I was like, okay, the dude knows 100% how to abide by the Japanese format of manga production that he does. Having color like this here and there is part of the mana aesthetic. Mana is allowed to have color here and there throughout the chapters, such as this, right? So when I look at Engine Quest, it definitely gives me plate number 3. Why number 3? Now, Seji's choices of how he chooses his composition and puts all of his elements in the panels or on the whole page is very well thought out, right? It achieves this unique overall aesthetic for the whole dish. You look at the dish and like, this looks nice. However, I have one problem with this, that sometimes the dish has this food over here where sometimes you don't know what you're looking at. It's like, oh man, you put all the veggies on one side and I'm not really sure what I'm looking at. An example of that is this right here. Now this is passable. Nonetheless, it is passable. We know, we can see clearly Akai got smacked, sent flying. However, this is the impression of he got sent flying through a big boulder. I can't really see the scale of this boulder. I can't really, my depth perception of what's happening in this panel is very hard to compute. I can't process it very well the same way it's hard to process from afar. It's hard to process what this dish is about. It's got the egg sauce drops here, which looks cool. But then here, you don't know if you got egg or salmon or avocado. You don't know. It's like there's a lot going on. It looks great, but you don't want a consumer to look twice and be like, okay, but what is this? What am I eating here? You don't want them to squint their eyes. Okay? So ultimately, there are people who are going to have dish number 3, but it's an easy cleanup, really. It's an easy cleanup. It's just, Seiji was a good example to show that you can have an aesthetically pleasing dish. It's just a lot of your elements are not clear enough to see. You don't really see what's going on. We get that it's food. We get that all of this is food, but what food is it? We get that he got smacked through some boulders, but how big are they? Right? So we can understand the actual damage that Akai has to sustain to keep a sense of realism, right? A sense of convincing the reader that he took significant damage. It's hard to see. Also, Seiji is guilty for using a lot of thick speed lines. And part of it adds part to the problem of this panel that it's hard for my brain to register all the shapes happening here. Because the speed lines are too thick. Even over here as well, I think this looks like a burst tool on Clip Studio, might be wrong, but you can always decrease the size of or the thickness of these speed lines. They're too thick. They're way too thick, right? So ultimately, it's an aesthetically pleasing dish. However, sometimes it's just hard to see what's going on. The shapes get lost in the details. The same way the food here gets lost in the details because it's all over the place. Now, if we look at Engine Quest in terms of like, has it achieved Passable? Yes, Engine Quest is good at composition and contrast and facial expression. It's pretty wacky and goofy. So for the style and theme of the story, it fits. It's within the correct context of its world building, right? So it definitely fits. Wacky, goofy. Sometimes it reminds me of One Piece, and I'm like, okay, it works. For the genre that it is, it works. What about panel flow? This panel flow is like this first page. It's definitely good. It fits with the aesthetic or the whole genre in a way. It fits, right? I can't really say much about it. It just Seiji has a good solid identity on the type of story he's creating. So when you have that, you can get away with any type of panel flow because you know exactly what sort of story you're telling. You have a good understanding on the identity of the story that you're telling. So it's his own type of panel flow, which works well. You see? Now, if we go back to mine again, sometimes, because I always like try to improve all the time, and I'm trying to emulate new artists that I truly am inspired by, such as the guy from Mononogatari. So the panel flow for me is like, if you're going to compare my stuff from now on and you want to compare it to anything, it's like, okay, compare it to Mononogatari. Now, of course, his anatomy skills are over the moon. He's a hardcore professional, so y'all gonna have to have some mercy. But ultimately, in terms of comparing it with the understanding that Passable has been applied here, it passes nonetheless, because the panel flow, if you compare my panel flow to the panel flow of Mononogatari, it would not fully work because Mononogatari does not abide by the Passable rule. Okay? Now, let's look at the last example. This is a manga called Similiparis. Yeah, it's hard to pronounce it. Now, I recently bought this manga at the bookstore. It was 50% off, and it was like sealed in plastic. I didn't know it was some lesbian story. It's not about the lesbians, though. It has hardcore lesbian stuff, which, you know, I'm not a fan of that, whether it's guy or girl being, you know, doing that. But ultimately, I'm glad I bought the book because it gave me the idea of Passable. Because what I noticed immediately is like, man, this thing is just giving us the bare minimum to let us know where the characters are and what the characters are doing. That's it. It's because of this book, this manga, that Passable was actually born. It just clicked in my head that, wow. So, if we look at like some of these pages, you can see that they're at some cafe, right? But if you just pay attention to the simplicity of the backgrounds, it looks like she's in a classroom here. Look at how kind of empty this whole space is, but not really. He gave you the bare minimum to let you know where the characters are. And then here, the character clearly has left the classroom and is walking away. But notice how, aside from this area here, we can tell that they're still on the school premises, most likely. You don't know anything else because you don't need anything else. And this falls under, definitely, very well so, under passable. If you look at this shot here, this is literally an establishing shot. This is an establishing shot of either the school or whatever, but this is what the guy does. He would literally put a window as an establishing shot, and you basically figure out where they are in the next page or in the next panel. He shows you a window, so letting you know that they're in a building. What type of building will be identified in the next panel based on the elements you find in the background, such as this. Imagine this was the first establishing shot of this page, right? As soon as we see her sitting on the school desk, you know that they're on school grounds. You can say it's lazy, you can say this or that, but it's definitely passable, right? Here's another example. This is the headquarters. He uses this thing all the time. Like, this is the biggest panel of this building he's ever done. Thus far that I've seen, because all the other ones is literally half this panel, where you're gonna see just this part here of this building, right? So notice how he's going about with passable. His composition is very great. I mean, look, man, when it comes to his level, he's a professional after all. Everything, he gets everything on point. Everything is perfect. Facial expression, contrast, panel flow, composition. Everything's 100,000,000% awesome. It just works. It just works. Now, when it comes to what dish does he fall under? He falls under the first one. The first one has less elements than the second one, right? It has less elements than the third one. And of course, it has far less elements than the fourth one. So he definitely falls under number one. I'm number two, Sage is number three, Berserk is number four. But this guy, he is number one. He gets away with it. It's totally passable. His facial expressions are so well executed, you know. Now, look at the interior of this whole page. It looks like it's some sort of laboratory, but you don't really know, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter at all, because whatever comes to your mind, hey, this looks like a lab, it means it is a lab. This guy's implying what it is truly, right? And it's enough. And it truly is enough. He truly has mastered passable. Okay? Now, that's all now for all the examples. I want to quickly show you the art periods and movements. Now, we all should know, like ancient art, art periods from the let's say from 400 AD and so on. We know. We don't have to go through the whole thing. What I did want to show you, though, was this movement here. Where the heck is it? Oh yeah, the arts and craft movement. So this is an anti-industrial movement, borrowed elements from the medieval and romantic periods as it stood for social reform, believing the arts could affect society. It focused on utility and quality of design, and predominantly seen in furniture and architecture. This was a defiance against the Industrial Revolution, right? Now, are we defying the fourth industrial revolution? This is not a defiance because you can't win. You can't win. Too many hunchbacks out there just guzzling slop. You can't win. You can't fight them, right? We are just responding to it because you want to keep drawing, but you feel guilty that you can't do enough. And if you feel guilty for not doing enough, eventually you're going to call it quits. Because now drawing is not bringing you pleasure, it's bringing you guilt. You see? So this is how we're responding to the fourth industrial revolution, where AI can generate high quality stuff in 5 seconds and it takes you a month. So now with Passable, however, and all the examples you've seen, you now can see that, hey, this is what I can do. I don't have to cook up a storm and make it like dish number 4. I can just make it like dish 1 to 3. It's going to save you time, right? It's going to save you guilt, right? But for it to actually taste good and look good and be satisfying to the consumer, it must abide under the Passable principles. It must have good contrast, composition, vivid expressions, and panel flow. To take it a step further, for the consumer to actually fall in love with your product, it must have all the ManaA ingredients. It must be familiar, relatable, hopeful, inspiring. If it has 2 out of the 4, good enough. Good enough, really. Because if it's got 2 out of 4, it's like one of those cheap video games from back in the day where you just picked up and play. It was good enough, right? But some of us want to go beyond in terms of having the ingredients. But that's up to you. Let's quickly watch this video here.
The arts and crafts movement, a design movement and philosophy developed in England in the late Victorian era, began roughly in the 1860s. It got its name from an English organization called the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society that began in 1887. At this time in England, industrialization was in full swing. People were leaving the country for the city, and larger factories made an increasing number of mass-produced goods. In short, the world was changing, bringing massive shifts to all facets of society. The arts and crafts movement was a reaction to this societal upheaval.
See, a reaction. Passable is also a reaction. People can say, no, then you're just creating minimalism. Well, people should look it up. Minimalism's got nothing to do with what Passable is. So, and as I said, Passable is under the context of sequential art in the manga department.
Members were concerned with the growing mass production of cheap goods and increasingly unhealthy urban environments.
See, that's exactly what's happening now. AI is cheap goods, cheap slop, garbage, trash. And authenticity and quality has been done away with. So this is nothing new. The only problem, though, is that this is the nail in the coffin. Because AI is self-learning, so it's already like Omega level powerful now, and next year, well, it's lights out. But if people apply what I said, that guys, you have to establish your tribes, and you have to share your ideas, you have to share your journey, right? Start your own tribe. Feed your own tribe with your handcrafted works. If you still got a job and AI hasn't taken it, and you don't have the time to go Mega Shenron on it, then Passable is exactly well suited for you, right?
The arts and crafts movement was as much about social reform as it was about a specific style of design. One of the movement's leaders was William Morris, who lived from 1834 to 1896, and who was a poet, designer, and reformer. Morris tended to look back to medieval times and the tradition of guilds, or workshops of skilled craftsmen.
Now, I would like to start a guild. I mean, the Discord somewhat is, but, well, I'd say only I'd say it's clearly just literally a handful of us, like four of us that are actually consistent in the Patreon Discord. So this is another problem here, that in today's society, people just want to watch you work. They are fascinated by you working. They don't want to work. And that is very demoralizing to the person working, because it's like, wait a minute. You want to share in the rewards of my work while you just sit there? That's demoralizing. Guilds actually cannot happen in this day and age because people can barely work with one another. You see, they just can't happen like that. A tribe, however, you being the village chief, sharing your wisdom so that there may be a proper harvest so everybody may eat. That is how it's supposed to be now. In the long term of things, this is the most sustainable way of doing things, right? But notice how I'm kind of like this guy. I'm looking into the past and so on, and clearly it looks like I'm an innovator and all that stuff. But hey man, a dude is passionate about this art thing, okay? Like, I truly care. And it's people who care who make a difference.
In a similar system, he wanted to rekindle appreciation of craftsmanship, believing that good design could be a positive force to encourage good society.
See what I mean? That's just nicely said. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Good design can encourage good society, a quality society, of course, because it inspires people. It inspires people. Despite this manga having its lesbian stuff here and there, its foundation is not the lesbian stuff. Artistically, it's inspiring, right? Story-wise, it's actually pretty good. Not gonna lie, it's actually pretty good. Don't know why they just had to put that lesbian garbage. But ultimately, it's inspiring because of the artistic execution, right? The story gets butchered by the lesbian stuff, but it would have been fantastic without it, right? Let's go back.
He founded an interior decorating firm, Morris, Marshall, Faulkner & Co., that focused on beautiful, simple design for applied goods.
Beautiful, simple design. It's pretty much Passable.
With a practical purpose in the home. He attracted
A practical purpose for the home. That just gave me an idea. See, I had said that on Suru Go, we are going to be creating collector's items sort of goods. So imagine bloody hell. The physical version is going to be in a cool box set with some cool goodie bags or goodie thingies in there. But I also, in my mind, when I had this idea, I wanted it to be practical. I wanted it to serve as decor. I don't want something you put under your bed, right? Your girlfriend comes over and she's like, ew, what's that? If you're dating somebody like that, it's not gonna last long. But I want people to buy the bloody hell box set and be able to use it as a decor, a practical decoration that adds value to the room that you're in, that provides comfort each time you walk in and you see it over there. Premium, quality, simple, and a joy to have. That's what I want. That's what we have to keep creating. We're creating personalized items here. We're going back in time 200 years, as there was one carpenter making a chair for this guy. He spent 2 months making that chair. That guy would die in the fire with his chair. If there was a fire in his house, he'd go back in there to save it. That's the type of stuff that I want us to create. Personalized collector's items, right? Not disposable, cheap trash. And with the understanding of Passable now, we can definitely do it.
Many followers who adopted his beliefs and ideas, and they also became part of the arts and crafts movement. Because the arts and crafts movement was as much about a reform philosophy as it was a specific type of design, there isn't a single set of unifying traits that identify arts and crafts works. But we...
Oh, darn. I don't want to register, but I think that's good enough. Oh well, guys, you get the idea, right? Passable is a response to the madness that is happening right now. And we who are serious and dedicated, we are going to partake in Passable. We're going to make the conscious decision that from now on, everything that we produce will abide by Passable. You don't have to, right? You can do whatever the heck you want, but if you want sustainability, you're gonna be following the Passable movement. Okay? Please understand what sort of dish you're cooking up for your consumers. Stop trying to create this gourmet meal. You're gonna burn the house down. And you're gonna roast yourself. You're roasting your brain. You're roasting your brain. Now, for the haters, you clearly you can't do anything. You can't do anything, so just go jump off a building. You're just not useful to anyone. But this is the first video of Passable, and more videos on it are actually going to be on Patreon. I'm just going to reinforce the idea of Passable. This was an introduction to it. That's why I put it up on YouTube. But understand, people, understand that I'm serious about this. Okay? If I wasn't serious, I wouldn't have said all this, done the research. I wouldn't have, right? Create these little diagrams. I wouldn't have. If you want to be serious and you want to be under a tribe of people who are actually serious, people who are genuine, people who want to create, but they were too burnt out to create, I guess, because they're trying to cook up dish number 4. Now you understand that Koffee Comics is the tribe that you belong in. Join the Patreon. Join the Patreon. You know, this is what we do. Everybody eats good at Patreon. You think this was a nice, wholesome video? Oh, good food, bro. I'm gonna get more of it. No, you're not. No, you're not. I'm obviously on YouTube. I'm gonna phase out. I'm gonna phase out. The people on Patreon, they deserve the full buffet. Think YouTube deserves the full buffet? No. It's not fair to those who are on Patreon. So I thank the Patriots who are there, who've been supporting. Y'all help me commit myself even more to this movement, this ManaA movement, this Passable movement. So I'm grateful. And all the people on the fence, you're gonna die on the fence, man. You're gonna get eaten by that snake that's in the room. Too bad for you. But for the rest of us, we're moving out. We're moving out. We're retreating from the battlefield. We're going to the woods. We're gonna set up camp there and traps. Any hunchback that wants to come over there, we'll catch you and cut you to pieces. So yeah, man, I'll make a video again in specific details about the ManaA ingredients on Patreon some other time. But yeah, tomorrow is Friday, Koffee News, the full coverage only on Patreon. There's a lot to talk about, so y'all better look forward to Koffee News every Friday, full coverage on Patreon, 20% coverage on YouTube. So if y'all want to eat a proper gourmet, right, then you head over to Patreon. If you want a taste, then you're gonna stay here on YouTube. But eventually, there ain't gonna be nothing on YouTube eventually. So yeah, y'all, this is Koffee Comics. We just created Passable, and hop onto that Patreon. Until next time.